Today, we're diving into a really powerful and honestly, a growing reason why people have to pack up and leave everything they know behind, their environment. It's something called environmental migration, and we're going to break down what that actually means and why it's so important to understand, especially right now.
I want you to just think about that for a second. Imagine the very ground you live on, the place you call home, suddenly becoming the biggest threat to your life. For millions of people out there, that's not some sci-fi movie plot. It is their day-to-day reality.
So let's get into it. What are we really talking about when we say nature forces a move? Let's get a nice, clear definition on the table.
Okay, so at its heart, environmental migration is all about survival. It's when people are forced to go because their local environment has changed so much that it just can't support them anymore. And this can happen in a flash, like a sudden disaster, or it can be this slow, creeping process that happens over decades. And that right there brings us to a really key distinction. The things in the environment that push people out of their homes, well, they usually fall into one of two big buckets.
Now, what's so interesting here is the contrast. On one side, you have these immediate, violent shocks to the system. And on the other, you have these gradual pressures. Think of it like a slow squeeze that just gets tighter and tighter over time.
First up, you've got the sudden disasters. These are the huge, catastrophic events you see on the news, right? A hurricane that just flattens a city in a matter of hours. A massive flood that washes an entire town off the map. When these things happen, leaving isn't a choice you weigh. It is an immediate life-or-death scramble for safety.
But then, you have the slow-onset changes. Now, these don't always make the primetime news, but they are just as relentless. Picture a farmer who, over years and years, watches their fields turn to dust because the rains just don't come anymore. Or think about a coastal village that loses a little more land to the rising sea, foot by foot, year after year. These gradual changes just relentlessly chip away at a way of life, until one day, staying is simply no longer an option.
Now, to really understand how these forces can combine in the most devastating way, let's look at a real-world example that I'm sure we all remember. Hurricane Katrina and its impact on New Orleans.
So, to get what happened, you first have to get the geography. New Orleans is basically sitting in a bowl, with huge parts of the city actually below the level of the sea and the nearby lake. This vulnerability, it was always there, just waiting for the perfect storm.
And this is where you see the whole thing just unravel. It was a catastrophic chain reaction. First, this massive surge of water comes rushing in from the storm. But the real disaster? The city's defenses failed one after another. Critical levees broke, flood walls breached. It was like opening the floodgates. And to make matters worse, the very pumping stations that were designed to get water out were themselves flooded and knocked offline. It was a total system failure.
But here's the kicker. When investigators looked into it later, they found it wasn't just that the storm was too strong. There were fatal design flaws in the engineering of some of the floodwalls. That's what made them so vulnerable. It was this terrifying mix of nature's absolute fury and preventable human error.
Okay, so this brings us to a really, really important idea. Environmental migration is almost never just about the weather. It's usually a whole chain of events.
It all kicks off with some kind of environmental trigger, right? A storm hits, a drought settles in. That's the first domino to fall.
But that domino then slams right into the next one, the economy. The flood doesn't just get your carpet wet. It destroys the farm, it sinks the fishing boat, it wipes out local businesses, it takes away people's ability to make a living. And the chain reaction keeps going. When resources like clean water or good farmland get scarce, it can cause tensions, even conflict. And sometimes it forces governments to step in and create new policies, like actually planning to move entire communities away from high-risk areas.
So you see, it's this tangled web. It starts with the environmental trigger, which then causes huge economic impacts, and that can lead to social and political issues. All of these forces weave together to push people from their homes. It's never, ever just one thing.
So, where does all this leave us? I mean, what does this tangled web of causes mean for our future? What's the big takeaway from all this?
You know, if you strip everything else away, it boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. People are forced to move when the very foundations of their life, their job, their resources, the safety of the land they live on, are all taken away by a changing environment and growing risk. And that leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about, doesn't it? As our planet continues to change, the very definition of what a safe and stable home even is will change right along with it. The question of where we belong, that's not just a question for a few communities anymore. It's quickly becoming a question for all of us.